Hello all, welcome to GetintoIAS, and today we are going to deal with the chapter called as biodiversity. So under biodiversity, we are going to deal with levels of biodiversity, measurement of biodiversity, biodiversity and food web, services by biodiversity, biodiversity loss and the causes, and modes of conversion, and then botanical garden, zoo, and finally the red data book. So let's move into the topic. What is biodiversity? So according to UN Earth Summit, it denotes biodiversity as the variability of living organisms from all sources, including what and all, like the organisms in terrestrial, marine and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes in which they are a part. I mean, biodiversity is the diversity within the species, community and the ecosystem. That is, they will be present in terrestrial and marine and other aquatic ecosystems. And the diversity will be within the species. That is, inside the species there will be diversity, and between two species there will be diversity, and between the ecosystems there will be diversity. So this is called as biodiversity. And we human beings or any living organism depend on these biodiversity for our resources. So let's move into the next topic called as the levels of biodiversity. So we've done with what is a biodiversity. Now we are going to deal with the topic called as levels of biodiversity. So there are three levels in biodiversity. So genetics, species and then ecosystem. So genetic denotes the gene and species denotes the species, and then the ecosystem denotes the different types of ecosystem. So what is genetic diversity? Genetic diversity is the variation in gene within a particular species. So if there are humans, Homo sapiens, so that we'll have different kind of genes. That is, 99% of our gene will be same, but the remaining 1% of our gene will vary. So that 1% is taken into account. So that is called as genetic diversity. And the adaptation level is very high in genetic diversity. That is, they'll get adapted to different kinds of environment very easily. Next one is the species diversity. You should take different kinds of species. For example, the variety of living organisms in Earth is called as species diversity. And if you compare the humans with chimpanzees, our species diversity is same. That is 98.4% of our genes, that is our human and the chimpanzee's gene will be same. So in the species also some genes will be same. Next thing, 0 denotes infinite diversity and 1 denotes only one species will be present over there. That is, in species diversity, if you see the term 0, it means there are infinite amount of diversity. That is, the diversity is huge. But if you see the term 1, it means that there is only one species present in that area. And the third thing and the last thing is ecosystem diversity. Ecosystem is already you know. So the different types of habitat inside the ecosystem is called as ecosystem diversity. For example, the corals, the grasslands are different types of ecosystem. So depending on the climate, the soil type, the vegetation, these ecosystem diversity varies from place to place. So under the levels of biodiversity, we've come across genetic, which depends on genes, and we saw about species diversity, and then lastly the ecosystem diversity. So we've done with levels. Next we are moving to measurement of biodiversity. So how do you measure a diversity? So there are two types on how you measure a diversity. First one is species richness, second one is species evenness. So what is species richness? So there are three types of richness. First one is alpha, beta and then gamma. So what is alpha? So alpha is basically when you take a region, if there is a region over here and there is a species over here inside this region, you denote the change. If it is increasing, it is called as richness. So within a region, you are seeing only one species and that species is increasing or decreasing. That depends upon the alpha richness. Next one is the beta richness. In beta richness, you take the same region but you compare two different species. So, depending upon the change, how it is increasing or decreasing. So, this is called as beta richness. And the third one is gamma richness. Gamma richness is a larger connotation. It means when you take an ecosystem, you will have different communities and species prevailing inside that ecosystem. For example, you may take 3 or more than 3 species and you will note down the changes happening inside that region. This is basically called as the alpha, beta and the gamma richness, that is the species richness. And the second thing is species evenness. Already you know what is evenness. Being equal is called as evenness. So evenness, when it denotes a low evenness, it means few species dominate that region. That is, when you take species 1 and species 2 in this region, if there is low evenness, it will denote that this species dominate this region. That is, this species is more than this species. This is called as species evenness. So, we have done with measurement of biological diversity. The next topic is biodiversity and food web. So, how is biodiversity and food web interlinked? So, the carbon, oxygen and nitrogen are the basic building blocks for both plants and animals. So, these plants, the green plants, right, they take in nitrogen and water from the soil, and through the process called as photosynthesis, with the help of sunlight, they produce the food for consumers. That is, they produce the food and give all the nutrients to the consumers. So, basically, the consumers which feed on the producers take in all the nutrients. For example, if the producers are here, the plants are eaten by the consumers like grasshoppers. And then these grasshoppers are in turn eaten by the frog. And the frog is eaten by the snake and the snake is eaten by the hawk. We know this example from the food chain. So, this is called as a food chain. It is interlinked by a single line. This is called as food chain. Then, what is called as a food web? So, for example, if the grasshoppers are here and the insects are eating these grasshoppers. So, and this frog is eaten by some other animal. So, there is a food web that is prevailing in here. So, if you take out this frog in from here, that is, if the frog is being extinct from this region, the snake would not have food to eat because the frog is gone, right? And hence, there will be extinction prevailing here. That is, if a species or animal dies away from the environment, this is called as extinction. This shouldn't happen because it affects the food web and in turn that affects the biodiversity of that region, because the frog is giving food to the snake and hence this connection is cut down. This shouldn't happen. It is very bad for the environment. And then this is called as the biological diversity and the food web connection. So, we have done with this topic. Let's move to the services by biodiversity. So, what are the services the biodiversity is providing us? So, there are 3 kinds of services the biodiversity is providing us. First one is the ecosystem services, second one is the biological services, third one is the social services. So, under ecosystem services, the protection of water resource, that is, these plants and animals that is present in the water will recycle the water and protect the water from further pollution. And then soil formation. Next one is the nutrient cycle. We've already dealt all this in our previous chapters. And then the climate stability, that is, our nature has the capacity to regenerate itself and be in a stable condition. That is called as climate stability. So, these are the services that a biodiversity is providing us, especially the ecosystem services. And the next one is the biological services. So, what is a biological services? That is, the biodiversity gives us food. That is, we have a variety of food prevailing in our earth. So, food, and we have medicines for various diseases that is prevailing and yet new to come. And then the wood products that the biodiversity provides us. There are different kinds of woods, right? Like teak, sal, And then the last thing to be noted down is the social services. So this biodiversity will provide research for educational activities and then recreation and tourism like zoo, parks and all, and then cultural values. So these are the 3 services that biodiversity provides us. So we are done with services biodiversity provides us. And then what are the causes for biodiversity loss? There is a loss. We already saw that the frog was extinct over here because of either natural or man-made activity. So that we are going to deal with what are the causes. So causes are of 2 types. First one is the natural and the second one is the man-made cause. So under natural cause, due to flood, earthquake and landslides, the biodiversity loss will happen. And then due to man-made, you already know what is man-made causes. Because of habitat destruction. If there is a land over here, they destroy this land for agricultural purposes or industrial development or building residential houses or complexes. So habitat destruction will happen in this place, and then because of hunting, poaching activities and then pollution, because of all these reasons, the habitat loss or the biodiversity loss will happen. And then moving to the biodiversity conservation. So there is a loss happening here, right? So how do we conserve our biodiversity? So this is the biodiversity conservation. So we have done with biodiversity loss, that is the causes for the losses, and then now we are going to the conservation. So there are 2 types of conservation in biodiversity. First one is the ex situ conservation and the next one is the in situ conservation, and these 2 topics are very, very important. So under modes of conservation, we have ex situ and in situ conservation. So what is an ex situ conservation? For example, when you take a species outside its natural habitat to another place and conserve it, it is called as ex situ conservation. That is outside the area where they naturally occur. For example, if you are here, I'll take you from this place where you naturally occur to this place and conserve you. So this is basically called as ex situ conservation. So under ex situ conservation, you have botanical gardens where you can conserve the plants, and then you have zoos where you can conserve the animals. So under botanical gardens, it is the scientifically planned collection of living trees, shrubs, herbs, climbers, creepers from various other parts of the world and over here. So this is called as the botanical garden. So if you go inside a botanical garden, you can see a huge variety of trees, herbs, shrubs and all. So that it will be scientifically planned and kept. So what is the purpose of the botanical garden? So the purpose is to study the taxonomy. Taxonomy is the classification of plants, and then introduction of exotic plants. Exotic plants is bringing a foreign variety plant and conserving it in our natural habitat is called as exotic plants. And then these botanical gardens acts as germplasm. That is, germplasm is you conserve the seeds and then the tissues of animals and then you interbreed. So that is called as germplasm. So this is the purpose of a botanical garden. So we are done with botanical garden. So under modes of conservation, we have done with botanical gardens. And then the next thing is zoo. So you already know what is a zoo. You captive breed the animals, and then it may be stationary or mobile. The zoo may be stationary, it may be fixed to a place, or it can be mobile. That is, animals can move from one place to another if the zoo is very huge. And then initially it was constructed for recreational activities and then mainly for tourism. But now it has been turned into, over time, it has been turned into conservational activities for animals. And then now we are done with ex situ conservation. What is in situ conservation? In situ is just the opposite of ex situ conservation. That is, I took you from this region to another region and conserved you. But in situ, you conserve that organism or species in that same region where it is naturally occurring. So in situ conservation, it is the conservation of plants as well as animals in their natural habitat. So that is called as in situ conservation. So where and all can you do in situ conservation is the national parks, the sanctuaries, the biosphere reserves, the reserved forest, and then the protected forest. So all these have been designated to conserve the species inside its natural habitat. Because if you take the species or organism from that place to another place, there are chances due to the environmental change that the species may die. So that is the only reason you conserve that organism in the same place. And then we are moving to red data book. So we've done with zoos and then ex situ, in situ conservation, that is the modes of conservation. Now the last topic for the chapter is red data book. So what is a red data book? So you must be familiar with the red data book. The term red is something danger is happening. So please conserve that species or organisms or plants or birds, whatever. So under red data book, you have a list. I'll explain the list one by one. So let's see the list overall. So under red data book, you have extinct, extinct and wild, critically endangered, endangered, and then vulnerable, near threatened, least concerned, and then the last two is data deficient and then not evaluated. So we are going to deal with all these topics. So what is a red data book? Who releases the red data book? That is, who releases these organisms or species as extinct, extinct and wild, endangered, vulnerable? So it is done by IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. It is done by that organization. So under red data book, it is issued or released by IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and then it is located at Morges, Switzerland. So this is the location of IUCN head office. And then when did they first issue this data book? So it was first issued in 1966 by the IUCN's Special Survival Commission. So they set up a commission in 1966 and they released the first data book, that is called as the IUCN Red Data Book. And then this commission released the endangered mammals and birds, that is the birds and animals, that is the mammals and birds was in a huge variety inside the endangered list. So we'll deal with the endangered list, but the overall view is most amount of mammals and birds were found to be in the endangered list. And then what is pink page? What is green page? So pink page is the critically endangered. We already saw a list over here, the critically endangered species list. So critically endangered mammals, animals or birds will be listed inside the pink page. So what is a green page? So green page is nothing but formerly it will be endangered, but now it will be turned into no longer threatened. That is, formerly it will be inside the endangered list. So now you will be taking that animals or species from the endangered to a safer place, that is to a no longer threatened condition. So this is called as the green page, that is you taken out from the endangered list. And then IUCN classification. Under IUCN classification, the first thing is extinct. So what is extinct? Extinct is the last individual has died. That is, you will have only one organism inside that species list. For example, the rhino was in news, the African rhino. So there was one organism in that species. So basically the last individual died. So it has become extinct. So what is extinct in wild? The same thing, but the animal is extinct in wild. That is in the forest region, in its naturally occurring habitat, it is extinct. But to preserve that organism from being fully extinct, you've taken that organism or species and you're captively breeding it. So that is called as extinct in wild. You may not find that organism in the naturally occurring habitat like forest, but you will find it inside the zoos. So that is called as extinct in wild. So we have dealt with extinct and extinct in wild in the red data book list. So now we are going to deal with critically endangered. So the next is critically endangered. So what is critically endangered? So if there is a reduction in population, that is more than 90% of population has come down in the last 10 years. So that is one of the criteria for critically endangered. So what is the next criteria? It is the population size. That is, you will have a population size, right, for a definite species. So that population size, if the number is less than 50 mature individuals. So if there are 50 adults, If it is less than 50 adults, you may categorize it as critically endangered. And then the last point under critically endangered is the probability of extinction in wild. We already saw the extinction in wild, the second category. So the probability of extinction in wild is at least 50% in 10 years. So in 10 years, the 50% of the population will go extinct in wild. So this condition you can take and put it for the critically endangered. And the last point to be noted down is the risk for extinction in wild. So for all the list, that is critically endangered, vulnerable, for everything, the risk of extinction in wild will be high. So the last point will be the same for everything. So let's recall, that is the reduction in population, it will be more than 90% in 10 years. And then 50 mature individuals will come down. That is, if there are less than 50 mature individuals in the population size, you can categorize it as critically endangered. And the third point is the probability of extinction in wild is, that is the 50% of population will come down in 10 years. So that is critically endangered. And lastly, the risk is very high in the extinction in wild. So we've done with critically endangered. The next thing is endangered. So what is endangered? Same points you repeat for this, but the numbers will vary. That is, first thing is reduction in population. Reduction in population will be more than 70% in the 10 years. For this, it was 90% in 10 years. For this, it is 70%, more than 70% in 10 years. And then the population size is fewer than 250 mature individuals. We saw in this, it is 50 mature individuals. In this, it is 250 mature individuals. And then the probability of extinction in wild is 20% in 20 years. But for critically endangered, it was 50% in 10 years. For this, it is 20% in 20 years. And the last thing I told, the point will get repeated. That is, it will have a huge risk of extinction in wild. So all these points are important. And the next thing is vulnerable. So what is vulnerable? So the reduction in population is greater than 50% in the last 10 years. So for this, it was 90, 70, 50. And then the population size is estimated to a number of fewer than 10,000 mature individuals. For this, we saw 50. For this, we are seeing 250. And for this, 10,000 mature individuals is considered to be vulnerable. And then the probability of extinction is in wild is at least 10% within 100 years. For this, we saw it as 50% in 10 years, 20% in 20 years. For this, it is 10% in 100 years. And then there will be high risk of extinction in wild. So I already told the last point will get repeated. And then the last three is very easy. How will you categorize something as near threatened? That is something that doesn't fit into critically endangered, and vulnerable. So if it doesn't fit into these three categories, you may take the organism and place it into near threatened. And then what is least concerned? Least concerned is it does not qualify for critically endangered, and then vulnerable, and then near threatened. So if it doesn't qualify for all these categories, you may take and put into the least concerned category. And then data deficient is you may not have inadequate, that is you will have inadequate data information. You may not have the right information to place it into the special category list. So that is data deficient. And the last thing is not evaluated. So the last thing is not evaluated, that is you will not evaluate into any of these categories. So these are the list under the red data book. Let's recall the list alone. So extinct, extinct in wild, critically endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, least concerned, data deficient, and then not evaluated. So we've done with the topic called as biodiversity. Let's watch the next topic. Thank you.